So, I thought to speak this week, or to learn this week together, the question of, or the issue of exercising on Shabbos, doing sport on Shabbat, doing all kinds of, training, weights, whatever you have it. This is a question which I get often because, by contrast with the way it was a few hundred years ago, or even much more recently than that, today exercise is something which is very much an everyday thing. You see people jogging around, you see people doing weights. It's a very normal thing, and you don't have to be particularly ill or particularly, exceptional to be doing this. Kal vachomer, if you're doing sports and stuff, is something which is, run of the mill, which it didn't always used to be. If you would go back a couple of hundred years, I think nobody would understand in their right mind why these people are suffering and going to such, strenuous measures to just, sweat it out. So, if you're ill, then you get your blood, and you let your blood and drain your blood out till you die or something. That was one way of doing it. All this exercise stuff is pretty new. Not that the Rambam is completely unaware. The Rambam in Hilchos Deos, when he speaks about keeping fit, which he doesn't exactly speak about keeping fit, he speaks about keeping healthy. The most of it is diet, but he does have a few words about, moving around and, getting a bit of exercise. But it's nothing like the kind of regimens we have today. There's no jogging and stuff like that, wearing out your knees like we like to do. So also the halacha becomes much more interesting, much more, I think, I guess, every day than it was when it was first recorded, as we find in the Shulchan Aruch and the Rambam. So we'll see if that makes any difference. And I think it's something which is relevant for many people. So definitely worth learning the sugya. So the sugya of exercise on Shabbos starts from the Mishnah. The Mishnah in Masechus Shabbos. It's in Perek Chav Ches. So clearly this wasn't on the Tanaim's mind when they started learning Shabbos. Right, it gets into the 28th Perek of Masechus Shabbos, Mishnah Vav, and the Mishnah says, Sachin umamash mashem b'pnei me'ayin. That's one halacha related to refuah on Shabbos, and another halacha which is related to refuah on Shabbos is avaloi mis amlin, v'loi mis gardin. All right, lo mis almim. Mis almim is the word that we've also brought into modern Hebrew. Hit amlut, right? Hit amlut, straight out of the Mishnah. You mustn't do hit amlut on Shabbos, right? Hit amlut, presumably, and that's how the Rishonim understand, means to do something strenuous, to do something where you have to be exercising. You're doing something which you have to use strength and vigor. And Rashi says, Lo mis'almin l'shafshef b'koyach, Rashi says, right, to scrubly, right, to do. Presumably Rashi, by the way, is following on from the Reisha of the Mishnah, which is about sachin, meaning applying lotion, right, balms or whatever people used to do on your stomach. Avalo misalmim, you mustn't do it with vigor, you mustn't do it with strength. And if you're learning it that way, that it's a direct continuation from the Reisha, then it really is not quite the line of exercise that we're used to. And Rashi indeed says, why mustn't you do it? Rashi says, the havi uvda de chayil. It's chayildik. It's something which is, it's not Shabbosdik. To be engaged in some vigorous activity, this is not the Menuchas Shabbos. It's related to chayil. It's an uvdin de chayil. By the way, uvdin de chayil, a very, I think, a difficult category in Hilchos Shabbos, a little bit vague, hard to put your finger on exactly what is uvdin de chayil. And I'm not going to speak much about that today. We'll leave it for another time about how do you define exactly uvdin de chayil. But that's how Rashi learns it. The strenuous piece. Doing so strenuously, vigorously, that's considered uvdin dechol. That's not Shabbosdik. Again, if you want to translate uvdin dechol, it's something which isn't Shabbosdik. I'm not going to get into that because lahalacha, the main I guess body of poskim follows the Rambam. Some actually say there's no machlokes, but it seems that the Rambam has a different interpretation of what is misalmin, right? What's the problem of misalmin? What defines it? The Rambam says as follows. The Rambam says, look in the following source is the Rambam Hilchos Shabbos Perek Chaf Aleph, and the Rambam says he brings the ratio of the Mishnah Sachin u'mamashmashim b'pnei me'ayin b'Shabbos v'us she'yisuf v'mashmim b'Pasachas v'chulei. And the Rambam also mentions it. There is an uvdin dechol, but that's not how the Rambam understands misalmin. The Rambam says in the next sentence, "Ve'ein misalmin b'Shabbos." Says the Rambam, you mustn't do this misalmin b'Shabbos. And then the Rambam, like many of us, will ask, what does it mean to be mitamel b'Shabbos? The Rambam didn't have his dictionary. He didn't have his Ben Yehuda dictionary to explain what does it mean to be mitamel. So says the Rambam, ve'ein misalmin b'Shabbos, eizehu mitamel. What is this misamel? What is mitamel? Says the Rambam, zeh shedorsim al gufoi b'choyach ad sheyiga v'yazia, oy sheyahalech ad sheyiga v'yazia. Says the Rambam, dorsim al gufoi, presumably it's a type of massage, right? Dorsim al gufoi, you massage him strongly. But says the Rambam, it has to be strong enough, ad sheyiga v'yazia, till it causes him to sweat. Shalom Rav Shem Tov. Nice to see you, or to see a part of you. So says the Rambam, it has to be that you sweat it out. Oy, sheyahalech, you walk, but you walk strenuously, right? You do speed walking. Ad sheyahalech, ad sheyiga v'yazia. Now says the Rambam, what's the problem? You know, sweating it out. Why is that a problem on Shabbos? Says the Rambam, one mustn't strain oneself in order to sweat on Shabbat, because it involves a refuah. So we saw Rashi that says that the problem with mitamel is uvdin dechayil, and Rashi, by the way, might limit the mitamel to l'shafshef b'kayach. The Rambam actually seems to agree that if you put on the ointment on Shabbos in a way that's not Shabbosdik, that's a problem of uvdin dechayil. But the Rambam doesn't understand that that's what mitamel means. The Rambam understands that when the Mishnah says avaloi misalmin v'loi misgardin, that means something else. And according to the Rambam, it seems to mean anything that's related to exercising, but exercising for the purpose of sweating. Just like in the Rambam's day, there was a refuah of letting blood. That was the most common refuah. So also letting out sweat, right? Taking out sweat from the body. That was also a refuah, a well-known refuah. And says the Rambam, if a person works up a sweat, either by massaging or by sweating, or by exercising, that itself is considered a refuah. If we see the Shulchan Aruch in Siman Shin Chof Ches, Shulchan Aruch says, "Ein misalmin dehainu shederes ala guf b'koyach kedei sheyiga v'yazia." Right? Brings the Rambam. One mustn't exercise strongly. He brings the ratio of the Rambam shederes ala guf b'koyach kedei sheyiga v'yazia. Also, that's the next part of the Rambam. Going to Shiur was incredible. You know, just standing there outside, walking 2 minutes in the hill in the August heat of Israel. You know, is that totally fine, or is it no? Okay, you know, when I'm running, I'm a bit more sweaty. I mean, well, the Rambam is very clear. That the Rambam says the only problem is when you're doing something in order to sweat. You want to sweat. There's no issur of standing in the sun and sweating unless you're doing it in... Well, so we'll speak about that soon. And that itself leads to the question of whether our form of exercising is a problem on Shabbos. Because clearly in the Rambam's form, you're doing it in order to sweat when sweating is a refuah. And then the question would be, is that true for us today also?
That's the reform because he worked with us.
So right. First of all, it says Kedei, and moreover, that would be possible if there would only be one halacha in the Rambam. But the Rambam mentions two. He mentions number one, you mustn't have this vigorous massage, and number two, you mustn't exercise. And he puts them both in exactly the same category. He says the problem with both is that you're working up a sweat, and the sweat itself is the refuah. So it seems very clear in the Rambam that the sweat isn't a siman, but rather it's a siba, meaning it's not a siman that you're doing enough exercise to give you a refuah, but rather it's a siba, meaning it itself is the refuah. That's what it clearly seems in the Rambam. Now, yes, correct. Now, it's taking out fluids, taking out body fluids that they somehow take out the disease. They take out the chayli together with them, letting blood, letting out re'i, letting out sweat. Now, by the way, very interesting, the Shulchan Aruch doesn't mention the second part of the Rambam. He only mentions the massage part. He doesn't mention the exercise part. The Shulchan Aruch only copies the first part of the Rambam. The Rambam carries on, and that the Rambam doesn't mention, the Shulchan Aruch doesn't mention. Very interesting. Now, the Mishnah Berurah over here gets into a spot of bother, gets into some difficulty. Why does the Mishnah Berurah get into some difficulty? Because in Siman Shin Chaf Zayin, I think it's Sif Yud Beis, over there where the Shulchan Aruch paskins, it's Siman, it's Shin Chaf Zayin Sif Beis or something, I think. There the Shulchan Aruch paskin, maybe I've brought it down below. Yeah, it's at the bottom. So base at the bottom, base. There, look at the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch there says, you're allowed to apply, lotion and oils to your body in order to, I guess this is something which was common and people do it today also now and again to improve your skin condition and so on. You apply ointment. That's mutter. Says the Shulchan Aruch, it's mutter al yedei shinui, that it shouldn't be left in the chayil. And then it says the Shulchan Aruch, v'lo yamashmish b'koyach, ela berifyo in yadayim. One mustn't do it strongly. The Shulchan Aruch doesn't say until you sweat. So is the problem sweating, or is the problem doing it strongly? Meaning, is the Shulchan Aruch paskening like Rashi, that the problem is uvdin d'choil, or is the Shulchan Aruch paskening like the Rambam, that the problem is that you're going to be working up a sweat, and the sweat is the problem? What is the problem here? Now, very interesting. The Mishnah Berurah asked this question. Actually, I think he asked it in the Biur Halacha. In the Biur Halacha, he says the Biur Halacha. It's brought over here in the photocopy. Right, Zemelashon Rambam. He says Varashi Perish that it's afilu emeinu mizia, even if you don't sweat, and the Shulchan Aruch brings it in Seif Beis. Says Mishnah Berurah, right? V'divrei HaShulchan Aruch kasha lefizeh. He says I have a stira, right? Well, the Ramaz Agrale airline sham uledina kasha v'leirad yes lifsei kuzeh ka Rambam is kema Rava Magid v'chulei Perish Arach kema Rambam. So the Mishnah Berurah goes with the Rambam that the problem is sweating. However, I don't see any stira here, because the Rambam himself seems to say that there's also a problem of uvdin d'chayil. The Rambam agrees that there's a way in which you can apply ointment, which is a chayil way. It's not a Shabbos way. And presumably that's what the Shulchan Aruch means to say in safe base. And that's even if you don't work up a sweat. And that's really unrelated to refuah, meaning the Shulchan Aruch agrees that there's a problem of uvdin de chayil, like Rashi, if you apply the ointment or the lotion in a way which is not Shabbosdik in a strong way, and that's irrespective of sweating. But the Rambam argues with Rashi on what the meaning of mit-al-mim is. Mis-al-mim, says the Rambam, that means something else. That means working up a sweat for purposes of refuah. And the Shulchan Aruch agrees to the Rambam that working up a sweat for purposes of refuah, that's a problem of refuah on Shabbos, meaning the Rambam, the Shulchan Aruch paskins like both. He paskins like one problem of uvdin de chayil on the one hand, and like the problem of the Rambam on the other, like the Rambam. The Rambam himself says both. So it's interesting that the Mishnah should see this as a contradiction. In any case. Well, the Rambam does say, again, look at the Rambam again. He says, what is the derech that you do it on chayil? Presumably on chayil you do it vigorously. Even if you don't work up a sweat, that would be a problem of within the chayil. If you work up a sweat, you only have an additional problem. What's the additional problem? And by the way, if you're applying lotion and you do it strongly, and you're doing it strongly because you want the lotion to be really good, and you also work up a sweat, that's not a problem of refuah, because you're not doing it kedei she'aziyah. You're not doing it in order to work up a sweat. Like I said before, if you're just standing in the sun or you're walking around and your intention is to walk around, not to work up a sweat, the Rambam doesn't have a problem. The problem is when you're doing it for the refuah. So the same thing would be in Sif Beis and Shin Chaf Zayin. Sif Beis Shin Chaf Zayin is not talking about somebody who wants to get a refuah, somebody that wants to apply the lotion really well. Then you have to be careful. Don't do it in a chayil dika way. In Shin Chaf Ches, where the Shulchan Aruch speaks about refuah, then we have a problem of working up a sweat for the purpose of refuah. So I don't really see a stira here. In any case, now the question is going to be, what's the halacha of doing exercise nowadays? And the problem really isn't a problem, again, if you're ill and you're exercising in order to work up a sweat for purposes of refuah, that's also, that's the Rambam, that's the Shulchan Aruch, that's clear, that's also. But what about healthy people who want to do exercise? Is that a problem also, or maybe that isn't a problem? So I think there are two ways to approach this issue. One way to approach this issue is to circumvent the problem. How would we circumvent the problem to get around it? We'd go to Siman Shin Aleph. How does Siman Shin Aleph help us? Because, and I think I've brought this in, it's in page number 2. Yeah. Siman Shin Aleph, we have another halacha. And over there, it's nothing to do with sweating. Over there, it's a question of, right, we know the pasuk in Yeshayahu, Im tashem mishavas raglecha, right, aseis chafasecha b'yom kodshi v'kidashtoi v'chulei, right, right, and as I say, this is the Torah, right, at the top of page 2, right, Ksiv im tashem mishavas raglecha v'chulei v'darshe chazal shalei hiluchacha shel Shabbos hiluchach shel Shabbos kiluchach shel chayil, and therefore one mustn't run on Shabbos. Now, running on Shabbos in Siman Shin Aleph is nothing to do with refuah. It's not to do with Siman Shin Chaf Ches. Running on Shabbos in Siman Shin Aleph is to do with having your hiluchach, right? Having your ways of Shabbos that they should be distinct from your ways of Chayil. Shabbos is different from Yom Chayil, and the way in which we walk, the way our mannerisms on Shabbos should be different from the way that we present ourselves or the way that we behave on Chayil. And therefore, says the Torah, that one mustn't run on Shabbos. Al kain ein lo la'adam laretz b'Shabbos kederech she'oita b'Chayil. On Chayil, you know, we're busy, we're running around, we're hurrying from one place to the other. But on Shabbos, we should be taking it easy. It's part of the Menucha Shabbos. It's part of the separation from Shabbos Kodesh. However, says the Torah in Sif Beis, it's not really Sif Beis. Sif Beis is the Shulchan Aruch Sif Beis, but it's presented here as Sif Beis. And there he says, Kosev Sefer HaMitzvahs, Bachorim, right, Bachurim, youngsters, Hamis Angim B'Kvitzasam Ubimrutzasam, that they enjoy their jumping around and they enjoy their running around, then for them it's mutter, right? And this is Paskin in the Shulchan Aruch, right? Look at the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch Sif Aleph speaks about that you mustn't take a psia gasa b'Shabbat, right? How much is a psia gasa? Ramah gets into how big exactly the psia gasa, but what it generally is a psia that you wouldn't generally take in your everyday walking, right? When you're everyday walking, your general manner of walking in a calm and collected way, that's a regular psia. And a psia gasa is something which is recognizable as something beyond that, okay? Something which implies being hurried and being, perturbed by having to get from one place to another in a hurried way, which is not Shabbosdik. So that's if Aleph of the Shulchan Aruch. That's if well, there is a cricket league in Israel, so I would put you together with them. But we'll talk about that in a minute, Ben. It's a very good question. I will talk about it in a minute. Let's just see Sif Beis in the Shulchan Aruch. Bacharim hamis ange b'kvitzasam and ritzasam mutter. Right? Says the Shulchan Aruch, if you're somebody who enjoys your running around, then there's no problem. Now, look at the Mishnah Berurah and Siman Shin Aleph is worried, right? Well, 1 minute. If it's mutter to run around as a bacher, then what about if you do it for a refuah? The Shulchan Aruch also tells us that v'chein mutter letayel, right? It's mutter to be metayel, meaning to walk around, right, on Shabbos. Now that's mutter. You enjoy your walk. That's fine. And says the Mishnah Berurah, afilim kavanasa lis amel ulis chame mishum refuah. If you're just walking around, then even if you have the intention of doing it for refuah, right? Many doctors, for people who have some condition or the other, that they have to walk around, right? They have to move their bodies around for purposes of refuah. So it says the Mishnah Berurah, 1 minute, what if you're walking, but your intention is refuah, right? We learned in Siman Shin Chof Ches that refuah is a problem. I wouldn't say that we learned that walking around is a problem, because we didn't. We learned that walking around for the purpose of sweating is a problem. But let's say you're a guy that you're just walking around and you also want to sweat. All right, because it's a hot day and you want to walk and you want to sweat. Is that mutter? Said the Mishnah Berurah, it's mutter. And why? Because it's not clear that you're doing it for refuah. Meaning, right, just like someone who has to eat lettuce every day, and for him it's a refuah, nonetheless he's allowed to eat lettuce on Shabbos. Why? Call it a machal b'riyim. Machal b'riyim is mutter to eat on Shabbos. Shulchan Aruch Siman Shin Chof Ches, if it's Lamed Zayin, right? The Shulchan Aruch says that one is allowed to eat machal b'riyim, even if your intention is to do it for refuah, but nonetheless, because it's the way of healthy people, machal b'riyim, it's fine. So says the Mishnah Berurah, that would also be okay. However, says the Mishnah Berurah, aval also larat kadeshis chamim refuah. Don't forget what we learned in Siman Shin Chof Ches, right? That one mustn't run for the purpose of refuah, and that is given the muchamil, so that you're doing it for refuah. So mishum shchikas which is the general gzeira and refuah they could think on Sabbath. Says the Mishnah Berurah, v'yesh machmir afilu b'til im kavanasa lis amel refuah. Some are machmir even for til, if you intend to do it for refuah. And he brings it from the Magen Avram, Eliyahu Rabbah. Clearly, that doesn't seem to be the psak of the Mishnah Berurah. The Mishnah Berurah in Sifkot, the Sharatzion in Sifkot Antes brings a discussion. Or he doesn't bring the discussion. He mentions that there's a question in what the Magen Avram means, whether he holds that it's osur or not. In any case, that's what the Mishnah Berurah tells us. And based on this, so there are some who say that it's permitted to do exercise on Shabbos if your intention is for enjoyment. Some people enjoy doing exercise on Shabbos. They're not doing exercise on Shabbos makes them feel, don't feel good because I haven't done my daily exercise. My exercise is itself a ta'anug. It's something which I enjoy. The same applies to doing sports of one type or the other. There's a Sakov Rav Kook. He was very against playing football on Shabbos, But nonetheless, if that's your enjoyment on Shabbos, so even though the Shulchan Aruch mentions Bacharim, right, but Bacharim doesn't necessarily mean, only young people. It can mean all. And based on this, down over here we have Shut Melamed L'Hayel. This is Rav David. Shut Melamed L'Hayel, Rav David Oppenheim from Germany. Right, he was the head of the Beis Medrash L'Rabbanim, early part of the 20th century in Germany and Berlin, and he wrote a very nice shut called Melamed L'Hayel. Many shutim are very nice, but it's a nice shut because it also deals with many contemporary questions. He wasn't shy of addressing many, contemporary interesting questions, and one of them was a question: are you allowed to do exercise on Shabbos? And basically, Rav David Oppenheimer says it's permitted to exercise on Shabbos, and he bases the heter on Siman Shin Aleph, just like we find, right? Look at the beginning of the tshuva. Yesh lehater mitam shenisbai ba'orachayim b'siman Shin Aleph. Bacharim and misangem b'kvitzasam umurutzasam mutter. Says the Rav David Oppenheimer that because we find that people are doing it for pleasure, therefore it's mutter. If you're doing it for tainug, therefore it's mutter to it on Shabbos. He says later on, he qualifies slightly his heter, and he says, he says later on, it depends on the minhag. He says, "B'makim shenagu heter to do it." Right? Even though at the beginning he says yesh lehater, but later on he says it depends. If the minhag in a place is to be makel, then there's room to be makel. But if there's no minhag to be makel, then he says, well, it's not so clear because he brings the Rabbeinu Chananel that he says even if the ein kavanasa l'refuah, nonetheless, he says there's makom to be. So he says there's makom to be matir, but he says it's not so clear. I'll call panim. If ordinarily it's not for the purpose of health reasons, but rather for pleasure, meaning you actually derive pleasure for it, then certainly there's place to be matir. Just like we find that Baruch Misangem B'Kvitzasam, it's mutter to do exercise on Shabbos. The same thing will apply over here. There's also an interesting tshuva about massaging on Shabbos. Yes.
So let's give an example. Something like sport, you're so cautious of the chair, you're running around. When it comes to exercise, I think you possibly end up murking around because they're exercising to build their muscles, to be part of a marathon. Like it's a real avoda, or perhaps it's even, something that they take very seriously. So I'm just wondering whether it's sort of like there's a light exercise, just almost like, tread water, so to speak. You're not trying to build muscle and develop and da-da-da. You think that would be a correct reflection?
Well, it's an interesting approach. I saw where did I see this? I saw that in the question of doing like power exercises, with machines and so on. Then Tzitz Eliezer, I saw Tzitz Eliezer says that that's also on Shabbos because it's very strenuous. It's hard work. I think I'm. I'm going to get to this in a minute. That's my next chapter, okay? But now I'm just working out on Siman Shin Aleph I'll get to it in a minute. This is a good question. I'm going to get to this in a sec. Within the context of Siman Shin Aleph, so I saw the Tzitz Eliezer. Tzitz Eliezer says he doesn't like the heavy power stuff, but he said that more gentle, muscle exercises, that's fine, he says. If it's like really heavy power stuff, he doesn't like that, but he says the gentle stuff is fine. What's the issue? He speaks about refuah. Yeah, he speaks about refuah. He says I didn't think anyone enjoys doing push-ups. Sorry, push-ups were when I was in school. Push-ups were the punishment. They were not the stuff that, but some skipping, stuff like that. Punishments.
It's a silly question, don't worry.
Let's leave it out. But I think that what Donnie's asking is the real issue here. Shin Aleph is a nice way of circumventing the problem. We enjoy doing sport. We enjoy stuff like that. I'm time conscious, so I'm not going to get into too much detail on that. But that's circumventing the problem. The real issue, I think, is the question of whether our mode of exercising is in any way related to the refuah that the Rambam is speaking about. Meaning, what the Rambam is talking about and what the Shulchan Aruch defines is sweating, meaning doing things in order to sweat, because sweating is a refuah, all right? But nowadays, people who are exercising are not exercising for the purpose of sweating. They're exercising for keeping fit. Now, I could definitely hear that if exercising is a refuah, then who cares? Sweating or exercising, it would be the same issue. Meaning, if you're doing something for a refuah, then whether it's sweating or whether it's exercising without sweating, that's a refuah. And the refuah on Shabbos is a problem. Shchikas samamonim. And we see over here, Mis'almin in the Mishnah, whether Mis'almin means dafka sweating like the Rambam says because I want my sweat, or whether it means something else, exercising without sweat. Either way, if you're doing it for a refuah, that would be a potential problem. However, the people that we're talking about are perfectly healthy people who want to exercise because they want to keep fit. Is there a problem of keeping fit on Shabbos? Just maintaining good fitness. Is that a problem or not? So I think we find a similar case to this. But by the way, first of all, you know what? Let me speak about the similar case first, and then we'll see what the Mishnah Berurah says. There's a similar case to this in a very common question of, is it permitted to take vitamins on Shabbos, or vitamins, as some of you might say, right? Is taking vitamins, is that a problem on Shabbos or not? Question mark, right? On the one hand, it looks like a medicine, right? It's like you take a pill, doesn't look good. On the other hand, who takes vitamins? All of us take vitamins, right? Vitamins is a meichel briim. It's for healthy people. It's not a refuah. It's like it's and some would call it preventative medicine. But there's no halachic category of preventative medicine. There's no such thing. Medicine is for ill people, and keeping healthy is for healthy people. Even if we like to call it preventative medicine, but it's not a halachic category. You're just eating healthily, like the Rambam says in Hilchos Deos. The Rambam in Hilchos Deos, Perek Gimel or whatever it is, the Rambam gives you how to live healthily. You have to eat this, you have to eat that, you have to drink your cup of wine, and you have to mix eating and drinking of eating healthily in order to stay well. Well, says Yona, the idea of shchikas samamonim applies just the same. And that could be actually true. But to be honest, the idea of shchikas samamonim shouldn't apply to anything nowadays. There's no such thing. So whatever Chazal were geyser on, we accept. Okay, Chazal said it's asur, so it's asur. And what do they say is asur? Medicines. But nowadays, when we're speaking about things that are not included in the Gzeira of Chazal, so for us to be worried about grinding our whatever it is, our samamonim, that's way out. Nobody does this stuff. So even though it's way out, we can't be matir what Chazal asked, and therefore refuahs are still aser. But to add to what Chazal said, we have enough. Thank you. The whole thing isn't so applicable anyway. So on the question of vitamins, interesting question. Rav Poskim Amatir, Rav Moshe Feinstein and Chaim Chilek Gimel. I don't remember the simon. He's matir vitamins on Shabbos. Actually, Rosh Zalman Asa is very interesting. A lengthy tshuva recently in Shut Chevel Nachalosai. He expands, he writes this at great length and brings different Rishonim and different Makoros for this. I won't go into it now. But ultimately, he comes out that it's mutter based on the Rambam and based on Shulchan Aruch in Siman Shin Chav Ches that says Meichal Briim is mutter. If it's a Meichal Briim, then it's mutter. And vitamins are a Meichal Briim. Many healthy people take vitamins and other nutritional supplements on Shabbos, and therefore it's mutter. And now the question would be, how do we look at exercising? Exercising seems to me to be very similar to vitamins. Just like we take vitamins on Shabbos, and it's okay because it's Meichal Briim, and many poskim are matir. So the same thing ought to apply to exercising on Shabbos. Exercising is also Meichal Briim. It's also something which is done by healthy people to stay fit. It's not a refuah, it's keeping fit. Now, if we look again on page 1, you'll see there's a Shiltei Giborim. It's actually a suffix of the Magen Avram. Look at the Mishabura. It's on the first section of Mishabura that's brought here. It's Sifkot and Kuf Lamed, but towards the end of Kuf Lamed. Okay. So it says in Mishabura like this. He says, Ve'ashifshuf. Okay, these words are underlined. Ve'ashifshuf she'oisin li'ger koyach k'dei lehashiv koychan u'levata mehena yefuson. Okay, you want to do some type of massage, which is done for people whose strength has been sapped, and you want to restore their strength. Mistapek b'shiltei giborim. Im davar ze domelo refuah v'asur oiloi. Is this a refuah or not? The guy is not ill, he's not sick, but he is very fatigued. And he wants like a good massage to kind of snap him out of his fatigue. I don't know. Try this at home or don't try it at home. I'm not sure. Cup of coffee maybe. So says the Shiltei Giborim, we have a suffix. Is this refuah or not? Is this okay or not? Ach, says the Mishabura. Based on what the Magen Avram says, the afilu bari, even someone who's healthy, afilu bari gomer, if shum refuah kedei lechazek mizgoi asur. If you do a refuah to stay fit, then it's asur. So it says in Mishabura, gam bezeh ein lahakel. Why? Because even if you're healthy, you mustn't do a refuah. And this massage, whatever it is a type of refuah. And therefore you're doing it in order to be mevatel ayefuson. So says the Mishabura, even that should be asur. Now, based on this Mishabura, some say that even healthy people who want to do exercise, it's asur. Why? Because exercise is a refuah. And like the Mishabura says, Magen Avram, even healthy people that do refuah, still it's asur because it's a look on page 4. We'll see the Shmir Shabbos Kilchasa. Oh, no, we won't. Where did I put, where's the page, where's the Shmir Shabbos? Page 3, thank you. Shmir Shabbos on page 3, says of Shmir Shabbos Kilchasa. Ein lis amel b'Shabbos of Yom Tov. One mustn't do exercise on Shabbos and Yom Tov. Ve'in lazik b'ripui b'isuk, right? Like physical therapy or physiotherapy. V'gam ein lazik targilim b'machshir kosher. Don't take out your, whatever it is, your chest. What are they called? Expanders. Thank you. Don't take out your expanders on Shabbos, says the Shmir Shabbos. Avali says, mutar lasot, and we mentioned this before from the Tzitz Eliezer, right? Mutar lasot, targilim pshutim biyad. You can do like simple things. Tzitz Eliezer, we saw this. Gam imoyse kach kedei l'shachach ha'ke'evim, that's okay. By the way, says the Shmir Shabbos, by the way, he says, where is it? Oh, in look down below in Kuf Vav, right? Vim nene mitay Talmud. Do you see that? Down below, there's like a finger pointing to it on the notes. Vim nene mitay Talmud. If you enjoy the exercise, right? If you enjoy skipping, somebody that enjoys doing push-ups, I don't think there's such a person. But if someone does, then yesh loma de shari, then it's mutter. Yesh loma shamati me'agrashaz Auerbach, then it's mutter, he says. Right? If you enjoy it. But do you really enjoy it? Be honest. You have to be intellectually honest here. Everyone enjoys the result of being fit, but if you don't enjoy the actual exercise, that's not good enough. Yeah, like an ill person that afterwards he feels healthy, but it's also. So says the Shiur Shabbos Kilchasa, no exercising on Shabbos. However, I have to say that based on our conception of exercising, I don't think exercising is considered a refuah. We don't look at exercise as a refuah. We look at exercise as staying fit, as it's the way of healthy people to exercise. On the contrary, when people are ill, they generally don't exercise. They like stay in bed and take medicines or wait till it gets better. Who exercises? Who do you see jog? If you see a guy jogging in the street, what do you assume? Do you assume that he's sick or do you assume he's healthy? So I'm not saying there's nobody who's sick who's jogging. Maybe there are some people. But our general assumption when we see people jogging in the street is that they're healthy people. And therefore, I think that from the refuah perspective, I think that there's no problem of exercising on Shabbos. I think it's meichal briim. It's like vitamins. I would say, on the contrary, if there's a problem on Shabbos of jogging, then it's not a problem of exercising. It's a problem of either uvdin dechoil, because we've gotten used to the fact that it's not Shabbos-dik to jog, and that would depend on the discussion of uvdin dechoil, which I don't have time to get into now, or a problem of siman shin aleph, like we saw, hiluchach b'Shabbos versus hiluchach b'choil, right? It's not the way of Shabbos to jog. It's not the way of Shabbos to have a psia gasa, to hurry around. And again, over there it was hurrying around, not jogging for exercise. But let's say you're jogging at home, okay? You're jogging, you're running on the spot, or you're doing other forms of exercise, not jogging, that you're doing at home. Then I don't think that would be a problem of refuah. And I don't think it also would be a problem of uvdin dechoil. And Baruch Hashem, I saw in Or Letzion, in page 4, Or Letzion says, he says, one mustn't do exercise in order to sweat. If you're doing sweat therapy, all right, if you're buying into the Rambam and you're doing sweat therapy, that's a problem on Shabbos. But if your intention is not to sweat, you're doing all kinds of stuff, it's mutter. The Chain says the Or Letzion, Rabbi Tzion Abba Shaul, it's mutter to run, to stay fit. Your intention is not to sweat, like the Rambam says, you mustn't have intention of sweating. But if you're running just to keep fit, said it's mutter, no problem. And it's mutter to do physiotherapy on Shabbos, because what's the problem? So even though, like we saw, Shmir Shabbos Kilchasa says it's aser, and again, this is based on traditional poskim who saw exercise as a ma'aser refuah, and even for somebody who's healthy, like we saw in the Mishabura, a ma'aser refuah is a problem. But if we look at jogging or look at exercise, generally speaking, as a Meichel Briim, as something which healthy people do, then there shouldn't be a problem to do it on Shabbos. And like we see, like the Rabbi Tzin Abba Shaul Paskins. However, one has to be careful that it shouldn't cross the boundaries of Uvdin D'Chayil. And that we'll leave for another week. Maybe next week we'll speak about Uvdin D'Chayil to try to get some clarity of what Uvdin D'Chayil is on Shabbos, because it's something which is really not so sharply defined and requires some clarity.